Hi there. This video has been created as an accompaniment to a Medium article about partial string joins, the link to which will be provided below. The article sets out a scenario where two queries have to be merged together. Now, that is quite easily done in Power BI through the various merge options we have. So we can do an inner join, we can do an outer join, we can do anti-joins. In this particular scenario, the data in the columns that have to be joined is not exactly the same. What do I mean by that? Say we consider two queries, teams by met area, which has metropolitan area, and the teams within them called Rangers, Islanders, Devils, and so on. And then we have NHL data, which also has the team names, except that these very same teams which we saw earlier, it's a slightly longer string for each of those teams. It's like New York Islanders, New York Rangers, and New Jersey Devils. So now if I have to join these two columns and these two queries, I will not get any rows because they do not match each other exactly. So how do we join these two queries? One of the approaches that we can use is create a calculated column. And this calculated column I will show in this video can be created either through DAX or through Python's Pandas library. With both methods, we will create a calculated column. That column will contain the same data. The data like Rangers will be converted to New York Rangers. Devils will be converted to New Jersey Devils. And once we have the calculated column, then we can combine or merge these two queries with an inner merge using that mapping column and the data in the team column in NHL data. So before I go on to creating that calculated column, let me just show you a little bit of the cleanup that went into creating the data that is as neat and tidy as in this query. The data came to me from the website, so I used get data, web, and then placed in the link. And it had the column for NHL, except that it was all the teams smushed together, concatenated, as we can see here. It had some cleanup that was required, like there were these notes, and then there were hyphens that needed to be cleaned up. Now, the initial cleanup, of course, is quite simple as promoting headers, choosing only the columns I like or I need for my analysis. And then the next three steps are what are interesting. In the first step, I added a custom column. That is, I did add a column and I called custom column. And then what is involved in this step is I replace all the text before this delimiter, which is the square bracket, and after this delimiter, which is the opening square bracket. So any text found between these two delimiters is replaced with an empty string. So that's what the first custom column did. And then the second custom column created in the same manner as add column, custom column. And then we replace the square brackets themselves with an empty string. So there are two replaces, one for each of the square brackets. Now the next step is one of my favorites. This uses Power BI's add column from example. To show that in a little bit more detail, I created a duplicate of this same query, brought to the point of just having the strings here without any separators. We'd like to insert a separator between each of these teams. So instead of trying to figure out what formula or mQuery will help me get there, I can use add columns from example, and then I choose from selection. My selection, unfortunately, I've taken the wrong selection. So let me start again. This is where I start, and then I say add columns from example from selection, and then I give Power BI a few clues, like I say Rangers, then a separator, Islanders, and Devils. And I give one more example, and it should be able to take off from there. And you will see that it has correctly identified that these require a comma between when the case of the letter changes from lowercase to uppercase. Whereas down here in Red Wings and Maple Leaves, because there is a space, it has not inserted a comma, and that is what I would like, because this is one team. Since I'm satisfied with this, I'll say an OK. And then once I have a comma separated list, I can separate it into separate rows using transform split column. And I'd say delimiter, which is comma. And then I would like each occurrence to be delimited or brought into its own row. That will be under advanced options rows. And I say OK. And now I have a column with each of these teams in its own row and associated with its own met area. This is exactly what I have finally. And you will notice that all the intermediate columns can be deleted because that does not affect the existence of this final column, which is what we are interested in. So now that we have these teams individually associated with a met area, we can go ahead and create the calculated column. Now to show you how the DAX looks like, I'd first like to show you the table. Now I have already placed the DAX here. Of course, you bring, once you come into the data view for that table, which is the teams by met area, you would say new column, and that will give you this mapping column that I have already created here. You will add this column. Now, this column's DAX, if we look into it further, what it has on in the innermost formula is a search formula. The search formula takes the rangers, for instance, from this table. Then it searches for it in NHL data table. So that is down here. So if we look at it beside each other, so it will go into the NHL data table and look for rangers. Once it finds the occurrence of rangers, and if it has not found anything, it would return a 0. But if it has found something, the number returned would be the position of that substring within this longer string. So if it finds rangers, the value it returns will be greater than 0, which is the position of where it found it. Once it finds that value, which is greater than 0, it will filter NHL data down to that same row. So you will get back in the filtered, you'll get back a table that would be the New York Rangers. And then we can use that filtered table and iterate over that and get the minimum value, which in our case would be just one row, which is the NHL data team for that row, which is New York Rangers. So this is how the DAX works for creating this mapping column. And of course, using this mapping column, now you can imagine that we can create a calculated column with an inner join DAX. We can join this query with the NHL data. Now, before we actually do that merge, I'd also like to share with you how the same column can be used, can be created using Python's Pandas functionality. So to do that, we start by creating a duplicate. Now, because this table already has the calculated column, I duplicated it, called it a different name, and it again does not have any calculated column. We will use this table and NHL data. The next step is to create a blank query. How do we create a blank query? I go to home, I would say new source, I would say blank query. Now within this blank query, I need to place in a formula. Like for instance, I have an example right here. I will copy this, come to query 2, which is blank, place it. And when I say enter, you will see it creates 2 tables and 2 data frames for me. So what does this query say? This query is a python.execute because I'm going to be using Python. The first argument of this function is a comment. I'm trying to tell myself, and when I work on this query further, that there are 2 data frames. The first data frame, which is met area, population, and teams _df, is going to be the same as, is going to get its data from this query Met area pop and teams. The second data frame, NHL data, is going to get its data from NHL data query. So currently, both these data frames contain data from these queries as is. We have to add some more functionality. That means we have to add one more column to it. And so how go about doing that is seen here. Once I have that query, what I would do is I would click on the gear icon because I just had the source. The comment I had placed earlier will arrive in this query, as you can see here, Met area pop. This is exactly the comment I had placed. Then I add these two lines. It says import pandas as PD. I'm going to use some of the pandas functionality. Now, in this data frame, I want to add a mapping column. So I call it team name map. And how I get values for it is I apply a lambda function to the column NHL teams. Now, NHL teams contains values like Rangers, Islanders, Devils, and so on. So this lambda function will apply over each cell in that column. And then it will look for the longer string in NHL data frame. For instance, it will look for Rangers within NHL data's New York Rangers. And if New York Rangers contains the name Rangers, which comes from this column, then it will return New York Rangers to me. So this is going to return for each Rangers, Islanders, Devils, the longer string that NHL data contains. So when I apply that, this data frame will look like this. It will have a team name map with all the longer strings in this column. Now, once I have this table created with Python, this column, since you can see it is in the Power Query editor, I will be able to do a merge right here. To do the merge, I go to Home, I select Merge Queries. I can do a merge queries as new. And I will merge the two tables I'm interested in. Mapping with Python table. I'm selecting this column, which I just created using pandas. And then I'm going to join that to NHL data. And I will have these two columns being joined. And you can see there is 31 out of 31 in each data frame is going to be matched. And finally, I will choose inner match. So inner join, and the two tables will be merged as one. And I'll get a new table, which I can rename as the combined column. And all the 31 rows that I expect will be present here. When I expand this, I don't particularly care about this one, but the rest of them I do. So I don't want to duplicate mapping row. I have the wins and losses for every team, and it is for every metropolitan area. So metropolitan area and the teams and their wins and losses merged based on a partial team name match. Thank you for watching.